Welcome to the table. I'm Midgarin, joined once again by our cast of wonderful and affordable role players. We're going to do a little session of mid-gaming today, and today we'd like to talk about backstories. You know, the do's, the don'ts, the really should not. If you like this topic, please don't forget to like the video, and go ahead and put your favorite backstory down in the comments below, along with any advice you think we've missed. I will read each and every one of them and reply to the ones that I think are really cool. I can't think of anybody else to kick this off than our very own Max. Max, you always come out with some amazing backstories, and that just builds the foundation on your amazing characters. What is your process, and how do you like to go about making a backstory for your character?
Well, I would love to tell you, but then we cannot be friends, and then I must kill you. I'm just kidding. It depends on what I want to do, what character I want to build. A lot of it the DM helps out with the adventure that we're going to do. A little background on what we're going to do helps me think about what type of character I want to make. In this instance, Max was what I was thinking about after I decided I wanted to be a combat tech. And then I thought a nice little storyline for him. Coming from Russia, an ex-combat guy, military guy, and then I'll put in some flavor in there about his brother being captured, and then now he wants to do nothing but see his brother free. So that was the whole background of how I built Max.
Okay. Is there any questions that you ask yourself, or is there anything that, like, how far into a character's history do you want to go?
Well, if I know, like with these and campaigns I'm participating in, if I know it's coming up, I have a good thought process of what I want to do. With the other adventures I've done with you guys, I've thought about it in advance, what type of character I want to build, what the background I would like it to be, give it a little bit of flavor. It just depends on, I have to think about it for a little bit. Maybe I have an idea in my head, and then as I start putting it on paper, I'm like, ooh, that's cool. I want to tie this into there because then now it brings more flavor to my character, and it also helps the DM to kind of know my background, and then there's some good chance of RP in the session, hopefully.
Is there any advice that you would give to, like, someone that's just beginning making characters? Any do's and don'ts that you feel that if you knew when you first started, would that help someone else?
Yeah, things I wouldn't do is, like, don't go too overboard. Don't make it too complicated. Just try and keep it simple. If you want to experiment with a little bit of something, don't be afraid to experiment. Just try to keep intact with your character and how you want to role play it. There'll be situations where you're role-playing, your character will shine out in certain situations. The DM may provide it, not on purpose, but just to see, maybe test you to see what you would do, how you would play your character. And then you just have to be in the moment. And as well as I know, maybe that sometimes I just come up with out-of-the-box thinking type of things, and it's more like I thought of an idea, and I probably thought about it ahead of time what I was going to do, and just see how it pans out. And sometimes that's the most epic thing, is to kind of just wing it sometimes.
And you definitely have made some really crazy characters, and I love each and every one of them. Now, Max, you've been doing this for a while, making characters, playing the game. But we also have someone that's fairly new to the whole tabletop RPG scene that does make very interesting characters as well. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our very own Chief if he has a couple of things that he'd like to input.
Yeah, the very first character I actually made was with you in our Tuesday game that we play. I've only made a handful of characters for even tabletops altogether. My method that I would go with to make characters, I would explain it as building a snowman, because I start with just a little bit of information. I keep rolling it down a hill, building up more and more and more, and it gets faster until I get a nice base. Then I repeat the process for more flavor, the second layer, the third layer, and so on, until I've got all the different layers into a character.
Is there any point that you like to start? Where do you like to think about your character at first? Like, do you start like, okay, this is my character, and then you work backwards? Or do you like, okay, so my character comes from these origins, and now this is their journey? Do you work backwards, or do you work forwards?
It can really start anywhere. Like, I can start with a general concept, a race, a general type of dude, an idea, and then I grow from whatever I start with. Just whatever idea pops in my head, and I grow outwards from that.
So, you're talking like origin, a race. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Mostly like a pop culture thing. Take a bite from this person, take a little piece of what this person does, and then throw it together in my own way.
Okay. Now, is there any questions that you're still unsure about? Like, you have done this in a very short time. Like, I believe you started in Thera Season 3, so not your first game, but definitely one of the first games that you're playing. Or is there anything that you have problems with still when you're thinking about backstories or creating a character?
I have a problem with, I don't know if it's a problem or more how I do it, is I can't get a full-on giant backstory like some of these people can until I play the character for a little bit. I can't just come to the table first session with a 2-page backstory. I have to play them and go, oh, that works. Oh, I like that. Or somebody might ask me questions about my backstory, and I like to just come up with answers on the fly and then work that in later.
Do you feel you need a 2-page backstory?
Not needed, but it's something I know I can't do. I can't do a longer backstory without playing a character. Well, I know some people like to do a longer backstory.
Some people do too long of a backstory. Anybody can chime in. What do you think is the optimal length of a backstory for, let's say, a first level character?
Short and sweet.
Bullet points.
It depends for me what type of character I'm going to build. Now, I'm going to put out a little disclaimer here because I've had an idea of a character I would like to build for another campaign for D&D. And it makes it interesting because it's a sorcerer build, but he's a divine soul. And it's a subclass of the sorcerer, which makes it very interesting because then he can cast healing spells as a sorcerer, which makes it interesting of how it's built. And it gets built into like a divine power has come down and basically given him his powers. And now divine, he's not a cleric. Clerics are different and sorcerers are completely different from clerics. But it's an interesting concept that I'm toying around with.
I actually have played one of those in one of the games that we don't record, not with you guys. I built a Divine Soul Azamar.
I'm currently playing a Divine Soul half-elf in that very same game. They're very fun.
So when you build a character, do you like to start off at the class like, okay, this is a divine soul. Now, why are they a divine soul? Or do you start a little bit earlier and be like, okay, well, this person grew up here, there. Oh, now they're a divine soul. That's the journey they took.
I start with the class, and then I choose a race. Sometimes I'll find a picture online, and I'll be like, okay, I want to make that, and I'll, figure out what they would be. But usually for a game, I'll start with class, and then go with race. With sorcerers, because they have the different kinds, like you have to choose at first level. That's when I try to figure out what I want to do, because there's like draconic origin ones. So I had to kind of figure out a little bit of not her backstory per se, but like her family's backstory as to why she was, descended from dragons or whatever. In the case of my divine soul in our other game, I just kind of put a little bit of a backstory together. Since she's a half elf, she's got 2 parents, and I decided to have the mom be the elf and have the elf be the shitty person for once. And so she got left with her dad, and then her dad ended up being kind of a dick as well because he didn't know that sorcerers were a thing, and so he left her at the church, and that kind of spurred her getting the divine powers. So I just did a very, very bullet point-esque build for that.
Now, I did something similar to that, except for I did it for my life cleric. I built the story around the family where his father was a soldier, his mother was a priestess of Solune. And then I built the story around how he got his powers from Solune from his mother. And I built the backstory like that.
Yeah, she definitely got her arcane abilities from her mom's side, which is why her dad was like, what? But the church's, their intervention, I guess, is going to be what actually gave her the divine abilities.
For my divine soul, my power, I was thinking more of there is an epic battle, and then there's a celestial being has graced him with his powers. And then that's how his path starts as a divine soul.
Nice. And mine's definitely not overly religious.
Well, it's different because it's not technically religious. Because if you read the Divine Sorcerer and the Cleric and how the differences between them, if you read a little bit more into it, there's actually a little bit more flavor there. Where clerics don't favor sorcerers like that because they don't really pray for their powers. They just come to them from a divine being.
Yeah, my sorcerer is she's religious, but she's not cleric levels of religious, I guess.
And I'm just sharing because that's how I think, and it's more like that's how I would build my backstory, and it would probably turn out pretty good.
So my question, I guess, is for H. You were talking about the parents. How important is your character's parents when building a backstory?
At first, when I first started with the character, they were just, people in her history. But I view a backstory as something for the DM to use more than the player. Like, I'm basically telling the DM, here are some plot points you can throw at me, you can hurt me with these, have fun. So that's pretty much what I use them for at the start. If you got a good DM, then they're going to use those and they're going to integrate them into the story. That will kind of flesh out the parents and any siblings or past colleagues, etc. So they're just more like tools for the DM, in my opinion.
I can definitely say for certain that a few of my players probably wish they hadn't written so extensive backstories, because I do torture them with them.
Yes, but then it's also just twice as nice to use our characters to torture you.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah, we get our vengeance.
So many times. So many times.
But yeah, like I like to, especially like in the earlier stages, I like to keep my histories somewhat vague and open, just so that there's more opportunity. Like I'll pick, an area that they're from, but maybe I don't nail it down until a little bit later in the campaign when we're like, hey, the party's going to go down to this area. And I'll be like, oh, okay, well, she's from that area. So I'll kind of delve into that a little bit more, like when the time comes, or, if anything important needs to happen in regards to it.
So you're doing that now then for a certain game?
No, I actually had that setting actually bullet pointed out already. Like her parents and her actual hometown, just because she traveled around a lot. So I had to kind of pinpoint a couple of different locations that I needed her to have been at. So that one I mostly nailed down, but I left a lot of her experiences vague for the most part.
It's very interesting. Some people, when they start a game, they walk up to the DM, they're like, here's my backstory, and like just drop down a novel. And I'm like, I'm not reading this. Not reading this at all. And then some people, they're like, hey, I want to make a backstory, but I don't know exactly what to do. So can you help me with that? And I would like to talk really very closely to someone that hasn't spoken that much in this session. So Toxic, how important is it to get the DM involved in your backstory when you're making one?
I think it's very important to get the DM involved in the backstory, because if you two work together to build a backstory for your character, it's like working in tandem with the story. You guys can come up with some really great ideas for the campaign itself, because you both inspire each other to try new ideas. Oh, an example from a game that I played in the past, it was my first time playing a paladin. He was an evil paladin, but that's besides the point. But the backstory, it was kind of cookie cutter at first, but it brought a new life to the story itself, because what made him evil was a tragedy that happened in his past, and he was still suffering with that at the current moment. So what the DM did was he used that information that they came up with together, and he was able to implement interesting plot points to the current campaign, even though what was going on with the character had nothing to do with the campaign at the beginning. It became a whole side quest to save that character, and I thought it was beautiful, because I wasn't even there half the time.
Yeah, I think it's cool to really work with the DM. And right before we started this session, I know that we talked a little bit, because I forgot to do a couple things, and then we talked about it offline. And I kind of did it like on the fly, like with the whole backstory. And then you were like, "Yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page." So it kind of worked out that you were thinking the same thing I was thinking, and it really works out for the best for the both of us.
Well, like I said, Mac, you do really well. So I'm a very hands-off DM. I do trust my players. It's like, I trust that you guys are going to do the right thing. At the same time, I'll also look at everything and be like, no, that doesn't work. And if I have an issue, I'll go ahead and just talk to the players. Like, look, you can't be a king. It's like, yeah, you're a level 1. You can't be a king. That's not going to happen.
Can I be a child king?
No.
I would like to be a child king.
No, you can't be a king. You definitely can't be the long lost heir to, like, definitely not Japan with a harem subplot. Like, please try to work within my world.
I guess I'll just have to be the queen then.
I know we were just joking here, but like you kind of just sparked something in my brain a little bit. So you said that you're level 1, you can't be king, and that's a prime example of working together with the DM. Like, well, okay, I can't be king, but what I can be is the last living heir to a royal line. He's on the run because somebody is hunting him to eliminate him from taking over the throne, and that could spark an entire campaign right there. You know what I mean?
Or they could be a bastard, and maybe the true heirs are all dead. So
That's a
the
much
royals
better
are
story.
like, where's this
Right.
where's this child? We need an heir. And you're just like, I'm bored, hanging out in a bar, meeting all
Yeah.
the ladies.
And then they're just kidnapped in the middle of the night.
It'll be great.
So if anybody's listening to this and want to use this backstory, this is a Midgarin Gaming approved backstory. So enjoy.
You're welcome.
One on us.
I also like to think, like for most people, it's like for level 1 character, and you're thinking, "Well, I want a paladin." It's not like you woke up as a level 1 paladin.
Right.
You build a good backstory. You could think of, well, how did I reach the state of paladinhood? Where did you could build a backstory based off of that, and that would be an amazing backstory. Whether you were like 3rd, 4th, or 12th, or 27th in line, and then now you decided to become a paladin.
I had a cleric who was kind of along those, like, she came from a royal family, so they grew up in the Church of Lathander, but every day on her way to church, she passed by the cleric to Tempest, and so Tempest is a more, like, basically a war god, and so basically she would see all these people out in the quad or whatever, out front of the church, and she'd be like, I want to do that. And so even though she came from a Lathander background, she ended up joining the Church of Tempest as a cleric.
One of the things that you brought up earlier there, H, was your character is a half-elf, but none of your parents are like elven nobility. I don't know how many times I've heard, like, I'm a half-elf and I come from this long line of elven nobility. I was like, why do you, like, you do know that, like, non-nobility can have sex too, right?
Yeah, I don't see a point. I mean,
Not everywhere.
like, nobility is cool and all, but I think you've got a little bit more freedom if you're not nobility. She doesn't have to be all prim and proper. She can just be her natural bookworm dorky self. She doesn't have to be Miss Princess, and so that's more fun for me.
So, if you're listening to this, I definitely do suggest you, when you're making a backstory, is to sit down and talk with your DM. Try to make it so that your character is a part of the world, not just being dropped off into it. I do have players that, they was like, oh, I'm from this area, I grew up in this city. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't use Forgotten Realms. My world is a little bit different. Can we work on a different city for you? Can we do this for you? No, I want to be from this very famous city. I was like, yes, but we can be from another very famous city. No, that doesn't work for my backstory. I'm like, all right, we'll never visit that city because it doesn't exist, but you're okay with that? Oh yeah, totally fine. I was like, okay, then what's the point of you being from this very famous city? You just want to say that you are.
Yeah, that's another reason you really gotta talk to your DM. Because you're not gonna know the whole setting until you talk to the DM. A lot of people do homebrew worlds. Some people take bits and pieces. So you really gotta hash that out. And so even if it's, quote unquote, like the Forgotten Realms map, there could still be some differences. Like they could use other deities or other stuff from other versions. So I definitely suggest talking to your DM when you're doing the backstory prep.
So sometimes it depends. Like you said, homebrews are a little different. I ran a homebrew a while back that Mid was fortunate to be part of a while back, and we discussed it a little bit. And I told him, I said that didn't matter what he wanted to do. He could build whatever he wanted. Didn't matter where he started from, because he was going to end up in the same place as everyone else and be transported to a different world. So sometimes it depends on how you build your campaign, and you can make something like that work, because it doesn't make a difference.
I miss my brisket.
They sell that at the store, right?
The character that I built was an artificer battlesmith. And instead of a mechanical hound, he had a mechanical spider named Brisket.
Sounds deliciously adorable.
I'll go away now. I painted a figurine. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna post up Brisket right now. There you guys go. You can see Brisket.
Let's see him.
And part of the reason why I did that was because I wanted to give the people that wanted to play the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do with not a lot of restrictions.
All right, guys, we are getting towards the end. Is there any last thoughts or last little tidbits of information you want to send out into the world?
Even if you have a backstory set out for your character, I do think, so I prefer to keep mine a little bit more vague, especially on the personality front, just because I like to flesh that out as I'm going. Like, for instance, I found out that one of my clerics was basically Captain America when she encountered the party and somebody said the word shit and she called them out on their language. That was a very, very difficult character for me to play because I swear like a sailor in real life, and having to keep myself from doing that for a couple of hours every week was rough, but it just kind of came out in game. So I do recommend keeping personalities a little more open when you're first starting out.
Remember, kids, message from Max. No do drugs. Drugs bad.
Only vodka.
That's a drug.
Ding! Alcohol's not a drug.
Caffeine's a drug.
Caffeine is a drug, but alcohol's not. Vodka's not a drug.
Okay, sure.
Unless you mix it with Red Bull.
Alright, no more speaking lines for you.
Aww.
I'm just kidding, we love you.
Let me go take a sip of my not a drug.
Yay! Oh no, I'm drinking drugs right now. Copy!
Is that everybody?
I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. All right, gang. Thank you guys so much for your input. Hopefully for those listening out there, it's giving you a little bit of insight into how we make a character, how we go through the process of making backstories. Don't make them long. Make them vague, and then work with your DM to make something very special, and that's unique to you. So, from all of us from Midgarin Gaming, thank you very so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye!